The strange thing about Hunter was that he only got extra affectionate when he was hiding something. For the last 2 weeks before his father's birthday party, he kept bringing Kiara coffee in the morning, even though he never remembered how she took it. He started calling her baby again. He even asked if she was still wearing that black dress he liked. At first, Kiara almost let herself believe maybe he was trying, but then she noticed he wouldn't leave his phone face down on the counter anymore. He started stepping outside to take calls. One night, she woke up at 2 in the morning and found him sitting in the dark at the edge of their bed, smiling at something on his screen. When she asked who he was texting, he locked the phone so fast it looked like a reflex. And somehow, the part that hurt the most wasn't that he was lying. It was that he was acting like she was too stupid to notice. 3 days later, she found out exactly what he had planned for his father's birthday party. And years later, she still remembered the sound that microphone made when he picked it up. The microphone squealed when Hunter grabbed it. The ballroom at the Westin downtown had gone quiet, except for the soft clink of glasses and the band packing up in the corner. Kiara sat at table 7 with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the half-melted ice in her drink. Then she heard her husband say, "I've spent years pretending I'm happy." A few people laughed nervously. Hunter smiled and looked straight at her. "The truth is, I married the wrong woman." The room froze. Kiara felt her aunt's hand clamp around her wrist under the table. Then, a woman in a red dress stood up beside the stage. Young, beautiful, smiling. Hunter reached for her hand like this was some kind of love story. "Her name is Vanessa," he said, "and she's the woman I should have been with all along." Somebody near the back whispered, "Oh my God." Kiara didn't cry. She looked at Hunter, then she looked at the woman beside him, and finally, she looked down at the thick manila envelope in her purse. Because for the last 2 weeks, she had known this moment was coming, and Hunter had no idea what was inside that envelope. Then Kiara stood up and walked toward the stage. "Welcome to Mr. Graham's story, my beautiful, amazing family. Y'all have been so supportive, and I promise to always do my best to give you the best as I learn and improve every day." If this is your first time watching, comment below with where you're watching from and subscribe to officially join the family. Kiara grew up in a little yellow house on the south side of Houston where the front screen door never closed all the way and somebody was always coming in or out. On weekday mornings, the kitchen smelled like grease, coffee, and the hot comb her grandmother left sitting on the stove. On Saturdays, there were cousins asleep on the floor in the living room, cartoons too loud on the television, and somebody's baby crying before the sun was all the way up. Her grandmother, Miss Loretta, believed in 2 things: keeping food in the house and never letting people see you struggle. "If you cry," she used to tell Kiara while snapping green beans at the kitchen table, "cry in the bathroom, wash your face, and come back out looking like you got sense." Her mother, Denise, worked 2 jobs for most of Kiara's childhood. During the day, she worked the front desk at a dentist's office. At night, she cleaned office buildings downtown with her cousin Sheila. Kiara remembered hearing her mother come home after midnight, trying not to wake anybody. She would hear the front door click shut, then the soft sound of Denise taking off her shoes in the hallway. Sometimes Kiara would pretend to still be asleep on the couch. Her mother would stand there for a second looking at her, tired in a way that seemed bigger than just being sleepy. Then she would pull a blanket over her and whisper, "You gonna have an easier life than this. I don't know how yet, but you are." By the time Kiara was 10, she knew how to make ramen for her younger cousins, help her grandmother count cash for the electric bill, and tell when her mother was lying about everything being okay. "How much they short this month?" Kiara asked one night. Her grandmother looked up from the kitchen table. "You don't need to worry about grown folks' business." "It ain't grown folks' business if the lights get cut off." Miss Loretta stared at her for a second, then laughed softly. "You too much like me," she said. At church every Sunday, the women in her family sat on the left side, in the 3rd pew from the front. They wore bright dresses and smiled at people and acted like their lives were not held together with overdue notices and prayer. Kiara watched those women her whole life. Her grandmother carrying 3 plates to the church fellowship hall after staying up all night with a sick cousin. Her mother giving $20 to somebody who needed gas even though she barely had 30 in her own purse. Her Aunt Celeste telling everybody she was fine 2 weeks after her husband left. Nobody said they were struggling. They just kept moving. That was where Kiara learned it. If something broke, you fixed it. If somebody needed help, you gave it. If you were hurting, you kept that part to yourself. By the time she was 16, she had a job answering phones at a small trucking office after school. The office sat between a tire shop and a bail bond place on Telephone Road. The carpet smelled like cigarette smoke, the air conditioner barely worked, and the owner, a man named Mr. Jenkins, yelled every time somebody lost a shipment. But Kiara loved it. She loved the maps pinned to the walls. She loved hearing drivers call in from San Antonio, Dallas, Baton Rouge. She loved how every problem had an answer if you stayed calm long enough to figure it out. One afternoon, a driver called screaming because he was stuck outside Beaumont with a broken trailer and a load that had to be delivered by 6. Mr. Jenkins was out of the office. Everybody else panicked. Kiara picked up the phone. "Okay," she said. "Take a breath. Tell me exactly where you are." An hour later, she had found another truck, called the client, rerouted the delivery, and saved the account. Mr. Jenkins came back and stared at her. "How old are you again?" 17. He shook his head. "You either gonna run this business one day or start your own." At the time, she laughed. By 28, she had done exactly that. Her first office wasn't really an office. It was the corner of her apartment dining room with a folding table, a used laptop, and a printer she bought off Craigslist. She worked all day, then stayed up until 2 in the morning sending invoices, answering emails, and calling drivers. There were nights she slept 4 hours and woke up with her face still pressed against her keyboard. There were mornings she sat in her car outside a warehouse and cried for 5 minutes because she had $37 left in her checking account and payroll due on Friday. But every time she thought about giving up, she thought about her mother walking in the door after midnight. She thought about Miss Loretta saying, "If it breaks, fix it." So she kept going. By the 3rd year, her logistics company had contracts with 3 regional distributors. By the 5th year, she had a small office near East Downtown, 8 employees, and enough money in the bank that she no longer checked her account before buying groceries. But almost nobody knew. Kiara learned very quickly what happened when people found out a woman had money. The first time, it was a man she dated for 3 months. As soon as he found out she owned the company, he started making jokes. "You probably don't need me," he said one night. Then later, "Must be nice to have rich girl problems." Then later still, "You think you better than people now?" She broke up with him 2 weeks after that. Then there were the cousins with business ideas that somehow always ended with her paying for everything. The old friend from high school, who called out of nowhere to ask if she could borrow $2,000. The man at church who suddenly started complimenting her every Sunday once he heard she owned a company. So Kiara learned to keep it quiet. She drove a modest gray SUV that was 3 years old. She lived in a nice house, but not in one of the neighborhoods where people talked about square footage like it was a personality trait. She wore small earrings and plain clothes and still got her hair done every other Saturday at Miss Tanya's salon on Alameda. When people asked what she did, she smiled and said, "I work in transportation." And usually, that was enough. One Saturday afternoon, she sat in Miss Tanya's salon with foil in her hair while women talked over each other about husbands, church, and whose son had gotten arrested. "You still single?" Miss Tanya asked from behind her. Kiara rolled her eyes. "Why y'all ask me that every time I come in here?" "Because you too pretty to be working all the time." "I'm not working all the time." The whole salon got quiet for exactly 1 second. Then everybody started laughing. Miss Tanya pointed her comb at her. "See? That's why you still single. You don't even know when somebody joking." Kiara laughed too, but later that night, sitting alone in her kitchen with takeout she was too tired to eat, the silence in the house felt heavier than usual. Her phone buzzed. It was her Aunt Celeste. "You still coming to that fundraiser with me Thursday?" Kiara stared at the message. The fundraiser was downtown at one of those hotel ballrooms where people wore expensive clothes and acted like they enjoyed standing around talking about non-profit boards and wine. She had already told her aunt no twice. A minute later, her phone rang. "You better not let me die alone at that boring thing," Aunt Celeste said without even saying hello. "I have work." "You always have work." "I actually like work." "No, baby. You like hiding in work." Kiara leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. "I am not hiding. You are 38 years old, and the most exciting thing in your refrigerator is 3 different salad dressings. I'm 28. "Exactly," Aunt Celeste said. and already acting 60. Kiara laughed in spite of herself. "Please come," her aunt said, softer now. "One night, put on a dress, drink bad wine, make me look less lonely." Kiara looked around the quiet kitchen. The sink had 2 dishes in it. Her laptop bag sat by the door. The television was on mute. There was no real reason not to go except that she had gotten too comfortable living the same small, controlled life every day. "Fine," she said finally. "But if anybody tries to talk to me about tax write-offs, I'm leaving." "That's my girl." Thursday night, Kiara stood in front of her bathroom mirror, holding 2 dresses. One was navy blue. One was black. She picked the black one because it looked simpler. By the time she and Aunt Celeste walked into the hotel ballroom downtown, Kiara already regretted saying yes. The room was full of people in expensive clothes pretending not to look at each other while absolutely looking at each other. A waiter walked by with tiny crab cakes on a tray. A jazz trio played in the corner. Her aunt disappeared almost immediately after spotting somebody she knew from church. "Don't leave," she called over her shoulder. Kiara muttered, "Too late." She moved toward the bar, reaching for the first glass of wine she could find, and that was when she heard a man's voice beside her say, $5 for valet parking and they still make you park 3 blocks away. That can't be legal." Kiara turned and saw a man about 10 years older than her standing beside her with one hand in his pocket and the other holding a glass he clearly did not want. He was handsome in the kind of way that looked effortless. Clean suit, expensive watch, hair cut just messy enough to seem accidental. But there was something tired in his face. Kiara looked toward the front entrance. "You parked 3 blocks away?" "Worse," he said. "I paid $5 to park 3 blocks away." That made her laugh harder than it should have. The man smiled. "There it is," he said. "What?" "You looked like you were about 5 seconds away from climbing out a bathroom window." "I still might." "Then I should probably introduce myself before you disappear." He held out his hand. "Hunter, Kiara." For a second, he just looked at her, not in the way some men did, not trying to figure out if she was flirting, just looking at her like he was surprised by something. Then he said, "You don't seem like the kind of person who actually enjoys these things." Kiara let out a short laugh. "I don't. My aunt guilted me into coming." He nodded. "My mother did the same thing." "Then we should probably stick together." "That sounds less like friendship and more like a hostage situation." By the time the bartender brought them fresh drinks, they had already moved into the corner near the tall windows overlooking downtown Houston. What surprised Kiara was how easy he was to talk to. Most men spent the first 10 minutes of a conversation trying to impress her. Hunter didn't. He told her he worked in commercial real estate. "My dad wanted me to be a lawyer," he said. Apparently, every respectable man either becomes a lawyer, a doctor, or disappoints his father. "And which one are you?" He smiled into his drink. "Depends which day you ask him." Kiara laughed. "And what about you?" he asked. "What do you do?" She hesitated for the smallest second. "I work in transportation." "What does that mean?" "It means people call me when things go wrong, and I fix them." He looked at her for a second longer than necessary. "That sounds stressful." "I'm good at stressful." There it was again, that look, like he believed her. The conversation kept going. They talked about everything except the things people usually talked about at events like that. Not what neighborhood do you live in, not what car do you drive. Hunter asked, "What did you think your life would look like when you were younger?" Kiara leaned against the window and thought about it. "When I was little, I thought I'd be a singer." "A singer?" "Don't laugh." "I'm not laughing." "You are absolutely laughing." "I'm smiling," he said. "There's a difference." She rolled her eyes. "My grandmother used to make me sing in church." "What happened?" "I realized I can't sing." "That's tragic. What about you?" Hunter looked down at the city lights below them. "When I was a kid, I thought by 30 I'd have everything figured out." Kiara smiled a little. "And?" He looked back at her. "And now I'm 38, and I still call my mother when I don't know how long to cook chicken." For the first time that night, he laughed like he meant it. Later, after her aunt finally found her and announced they had to leave because she had church in the morning and knees that don't forgive bad shoes, Hunter walked Kiara to her car. The night air was warm and smelled faintly like rain and car exhaust. He stood beside her SUV with his hands in his pockets. "I know this is usually the part where people pretend they'll accidentally run into each other again," he said. Kiara smiled. But I'd rather just ask for your number." She looked at him for a second, then handed him her phone. The first text came 15 minutes after she got home. "Please confirm you made it home safely and were not kidnapped by your aunt." Kiara laughed, sitting alone in her kitchen. She typed back, "I survived, barely." She stole 2 centerpieces on the way out. His reply came almost immediately. "I knew it. Criminal behavior runs in your family." For the first time in a long time, Kiara went to bed smiling. Their first date was supposed to be dinner at a nice restaurant in Midtown. Instead, Hunter showed up 40 minutes late because he got stuck helping his father with some problem at work. By the time he called, Kiara was already sitting in the restaurant parking lot, annoyed. "I'm so sorry," he said. "You can leave. I'd deserve it." She should have. Instead, she said, "You owe me tacos." 20 minutes later, they were sitting in a tiny taco place off Shepherd Drive, eating carne asada and drinking from styrofoam cups. Hunter looked around at the bright plastic tables and the television mounted in the corner playing a soccer game. "This is way better than the restaurant." "That's because you don't have to pretend to know what anything on the menu means." He pointed at her. "Exactly." After that, they kept finding reasons to see each other. Some nights they sat in her car outside her house, talking until 1 in the morning because neither of them wanted to end the conversation. Sometimes he came over after work and helped her cook, even though he was terrible at it. One night, he tried to make spaghetti and somehow managed to burn garlic bread. "I don't understand how you ruined the part that comes frozen," Kiara said. He pointed the spatula at her. "You said you wanted a man who takes initiative." "I didn't say I wanted one who starts kitchen fires." Another night, they drove out toward Galveston with the windows down and no real destination. Hunter drummed his fingers against the steering wheel while old songs played softly through the speakers. Kiara rested her head against the window and watched the lights pass by. "You ever think about leaving Houston?" he asked. "No. Never?" She shook her head. "My whole life is here." He was quiet for a second. "That must be nice." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" He kept his eyes on the road. "My family." He shrugged. "I don't know. We've always looked close from the outside. But mostly we're just good at pretending." Slowly, over the next few months, Kiara learned what he meant. Hunter grew up in a beautiful house outside Houston, where everything looked perfect, and nobody said what they actually felt. His father, Richard, had spent his whole life believing a man's worth came from what he provided. His mother, Diane, cared about appearances the way some people cared about religion. At dinner, they talked about who had bought what house, who got promoted, whose son was dating a doctor. Nobody talked about being lonely. Nobody talked about failing. Hunter told Kiara once, late at night while they were sitting on the hood of her car outside her house, "I think my parents would have loved me no matter what." He stared down at his hands. "I just don't think they would have respected me." Kiara looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached over and took his hand. "You don't have to earn love," she said quietly. He looked at her like nobody had ever said that to him before. That was the thing about Kiara. She listened, really listened. When Hunter mentioned once that his father loved pecan pie from a bakery on the north side, she remembered and surprised him with one 2 weeks later before a family dinner. When he admitted he hated networking events because he never knew what to say, she squeezed his hand under the table and whispered, "Then don't say anything. Just stand next to me and look expensive." He laughed so hard he nearly choked on his drink. And when he had a terrible week at work and showed up at her house angry and frustrated and embarrassed, she didn't try to fix him right away. She sat with him on the couch in the dark and let him talk. "I feel like everybody else knows what they're doing," he said quietly. "They don't." "How do you know?" "Because I don't know what I'm doing half the time either." He looked over at her. "You seem like you do." Kiara smiled sadly. "That's because I learned a long time ago that if you act calm, people leave you alone." He stared at her for a second. Then he said, "You know, I don't think anybody's ever understood me the way you do." She should have been careful with a sentence like that. Instead, She let herself believe him. A year after they met, Hunter asked her to go with him to his parents' house for Sunday dinner. The whole drive there, he looked nervous. "You know this is ridiculous, right?" Kiara said. "What is?" "You're a grown man. Why are you acting like you're about to get called into the principal's office?" Hunter laughed without much humor. "You'll see." His parents lived in a large brick house in one of those neighborhoods where every lawn looked professionally trimmed and nobody parked in the street. When they walked inside, his mother was arranging flowers in the dining room. She turned, smiled, and kissed Hunter on the cheek. Then she looked at Kiara. Her smile stayed exactly the same, but something in it cooled. "So, this is Kiara," Diane said. "Nice to meet you," Kiara said. "You too." There was nothing rude in her voice, nothing obvious, but Kiara had grown up around women long enough to recognize when another woman had already made up her mind about her. Dinner was polite, too polite. His father asked Kiara where she went to school. His mother asked what her parents did. When Kiara said her mother worked at a dental office and her grandmother had raised her, Diane smiled tightly and said, "Family is so important." Like Kiara had said something sad. On the drive home, Hunter gripped the steering wheel. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "My mother." Kiara looked out the window. "Your mother thinks I'm not good enough for you." He looked over quickly. "That's not true." "Yes, it is." He sighed. "She just had a different idea of who I would end up with." Kiara folded her arms. "Some woman who plays tennis and says things like summering in Napa?" Despite himself, he laughed. "Probably." She smiled too. Then, after a second, he reached over and took her hand. "But she doesn't get to decide." 3 months later, he proposed. It happened on a Sunday evening at her house. There was no photographer hiding in the bushes, no violin player, no crowd. Kiara had spent the whole day cleaning because her cousins had come over after church and left her house looking like a small tornado had passed through it. She was standing barefoot in the kitchen scraping burnt cheese off a casserole dish when Hunter walked in holding takeout. "You know," he said, "most women would not want to be proposed to while wearing old sweatpants." Kiara looked up. "What are you talking about?" Hunter was standing there smiling nervously. Then she saw the ring box in his hand. For the first time in her life, Kiara was speechless. He took a breath. "I know I'm not perfect," he said, "and I know I don't always know what I'm doing." She laughed through sudden tears. "That part is true. But I know how I feel when I'm with you." He stepped closer. "You make me feel like I don't have to pretend all the time." Kiara covered her mouth. "And I don't know if I've ever had that before." Then he got down on one knee, right there in the middle of her kitchen floor. "Marry me." She said yes before he could even finish asking. The wedding happened 4 months later in a small church just outside downtown Houston. Kiara would have been happy going to the courthouse, but her mother nearly fainted when she suggested it. "You are my only child," Denise said, standing in the kitchen with one hand on her chest. "I worked too hard for too many years not to see you walk down an aisle." So, Kiara gave in. The church was full before the ceremony even started. Her side of the room was loud, emotional, and crowded. Aunt Celeste was already crying before anybody had walked down the aisle. Miss Loretta sat in the front row in a lavender suit, dabbing her eyes with a tissue and pretending she was not crying too. There were cousins squeezed into every row, babies fussing in the back, and somebody's uncle whispering too loudly near the door that Hunter better know what he doing marrying this girl. Hunter's side sat much quieter. His parents arrived exactly on time. His father wore a dark gray suit and shook hands with people like he was attending a business event. His mother wore a cream-colored dress and pearls and looked around the church with the careful expression of somebody trying very hard not to appear uncomfortable. When Diane walked up to Kiara before the ceremony, she smiled and kissed the air beside her cheek. "You look beautiful," she said. "Thank you." Diane glanced around the church fellowship hall where Kiara's cousins were laughing too loudly, and somebody had brought foil trays of food before the reception had even started. "This is all very—" She paused. "Personal." Kiara smiled politely. "It is." For a second, neither of them said anything. Then Diane leaned a little closer. "Hunter has always needed someone who brings out the best in him." Kiara looked at her. "I know." Diane smiled again, but there was something sharp hiding underneath it. I just hope marriage doesn't distract him from his goals. Before Kiara could answer, Aunt Celeste appeared beside her, holding a plate with 3 deviled eggs on it. Lord, there you are, she said, slipping her arm through Kiara's. Come on, baby. Your cousin done locked herself in the bathroom crying because her lashes came loose. She gave Diane a quick smile that was almost too sweet. We'll be right back. As they walked away, Aunt Celeste muttered under her breath, That woman been looking at you like she's smelling something funny since she got here. Kiara tried not to laugh. The ceremony itself was beautiful. When the church doors opened and Kiara saw Hunter standing at the altar, he looked nervous in a way she had never seen before. The moment he saw her, his whole face changed. For a second, everything else disappeared. The church, the people, his mother, her doubts. It was just him, looking at her like she was the only person in the room. Later, she would think about that moment, often, because she did believe he loved her. That was what made everything harder. At the reception, Kiara's family danced, argued, took too many pictures, and ate enough food for 3 weddings. Hunter looked overwhelmed at first. Then he loosened his tie, laughed when one of Kiara's uncles dragged him onto the dance floor, and by the end of the night, he was sitting on the edge of his chair listening to Miss Loretta tell stories about Kiara as a little girl. She been bossy since she was 5, her grandmother said. I was not bossy. You told your cousin he couldn't cry at your tea party because he was ruining the mood. The whole table laughed. Hunter looked at Kiara and smiled. I believe that. For the first 2 years of marriage, they were happy. Not perfect, but happy. They bought a house together in a quiet neighborhood in southwest Houston. It was not huge, but it had a front porch, a backyard, and enough space that Kiara finally felt like she could breathe. The first night in the house, they sat on the living room floor, eating Chinese food out of cartons because they had not unpacked the kitchen yet. Hunter looked around at the boxes. This feels very adult. Kiara pointed at the broken lamp in the corner. No, that feels very adult. He laughed. At first, they built a life together in the small ways people do. Sunday mornings at the grocery store, watching television in bed, arguing about whose turn it was to take the trash out. Hunter always left his shoes in the middle of the hallway. Kiara always forgot to put gas in her car until the warning light came on. Some nights she would fall asleep with her laptop open on her chest because work had followed her home again. Hunter would close it and pull the blanket over her. One day, he would say, You're gonna learn how to relax. She always answered the same way, probably not. His business was doing well then. He worked in commercial real estate and talked constantly about the deals he was working on, the investors he wanted to impress, the people he needed to know. Kiara listened. She always listened. But even in those early years, she noticed something about him. Hunter needed to feel needed. He liked paying for dinner. He liked talking about taking care of her. He liked introducing himself as the one who would handle everything. Kiara understood where it came from. His whole life, he had been taught that being a man meant being the provider, so she let him have that, even when it wasn't true. About a year into the marriage, one of Hunter's development projects fell apart. A partner backed out unexpectedly. The financing collapsed. Hunter came home late and sat at the kitchen table without even taking off his tie. Kiara was making tea when she looked over and realized he had not moved in almost 10 minutes. You okay? He stared at the table. I think I just lost almost everything. She sat down across from him. What happened? He rubbed both hands over his face. If I can't come up with the money by Friday, the whole deal dies. How much? He looked embarrassed. 200,000. Kiara stayed quiet. Hunter laughed bitterly. I know, it's bad. He stood up suddenly and started pacing. My father is going to say I wasn't ready. My mother will act like she's disappointed but somehow make it about herself. Everybody's going to know I screwed this up. Kiara watched him. He looked less like a 38-year-old man and more like a little boy waiting to be told he had failed. That night, after he finally fell asleep, Kiara sat alone at the kitchen table with her laptop open. By midnight, she had transferred the money through one of her business accounts and structured it as an investment from an outside contact she trusted. 3 days later, Hunter came home smiling for the first time in a week. I don't know how this happened, he said. One of my old contacts stepped in at the last second. Kiara looked up from the couch. "That's great." He sat beside her and wrapped his arms around her. "I knew I'd figure it out." She closed her eyes. "I know." It became a pattern after that. Not every month, not even every year, just often enough. Whenever Hunter got in trouble, somehow there was always a solution. When one of his projects needed investors, Kiara connected him with a client from her logistics company, but told him the client had found him through a mutual contact. When Hunter quietly fell behind on the mortgage one year after a bad quarter, Kiara paid it before he ever knew there was a problem. When his father's medical bills piled up after heart surgery, Hunter sat at the dining room table one night with his head in his hands. "I don't know what we're supposed to do," he said. Kiara looked at the stack of envelopes. "How much is left?" He told her. The number was big enough that his voice cracked a little when he said it. 2 weeks later, the hospital bills were gone. Hunter stared at the statement. They must have made some kind of mistake. Kiara folded laundry on the couch without looking up. Maybe insurance finally did something right. He laughed. "You always know how to make things feel less impossible." She smiled, but later that night, standing alone in the bathroom brushing her teeth, she stared at herself in the mirror longer than usual, because the truth was, she had started lying to him. Not about anything terrible, not at first, just little things. How much she had in savings, how much her company was worth, how often she was the reason things worked out. She told herself she was protecting him. If Hunter knew she had more money than he did, it would hurt him. If he knew she had paid off his father's medical bills, he would feel ashamed. If he knew how much of their life rested on her shoulders, he would start to feel small, and Kiara loved him too much to let that happen, so she kept making herself smaller. When Hunter bought her jewelry, she acted impressed even when she could have bought 10% of the same bracelet without thinking about it. When his parents praised him for taking such good care of her, she smiled and said nothing. At dinner parties, when Hunter talked about the house like he had paid for most of it himself, she let him, even though she had quietly made the down payment, even though her company paid half the mortgage every month. One night, nearly 5 years into the marriage, Hunter came home later than usual. He looked tired and angry. He dropped his keys on the kitchen counter harder than necessary. "Bad day?" Kiara asked. He loosened his tie. "I lost another deal." She walked over to him. "We'll figure it out." For a second, something flashed across his face. Frustration, embarrassment, maybe even resentment. "You always say that." She blinked. "Because we always do." Hunter looked away. He muttered something too quietly for her to hear. "What?" "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. She could feel it. Something in him had started changing. He was still the same man who kissed her goodbye in the mornings and fell asleep with one arm around her. But there were moments now when he looked at her differently, like he was keeping score. Like every time she stayed calm when he was falling apart, it made him feel worse. A few weeks later, she found a letter from the bank in the mailbox. Final notice. It was for one of Hunter's business accounts. The amount due was more than $80,000. Kiara sat at the kitchen counter staring at the paper. Then she folded it carefully and slipped it back into the envelope before he got home. That night, while Hunter slept beside her, she paid it. The next morning, she deleted the confirmation email, and for the first time, a thought crossed her mind that she did not want to admit. Maybe loving someone this much was not helping him. Maybe it was helping him stay the same. The first real crack in the marriage did not come with another woman. It came with silence. Hunter used to come home talking about work, about traffic, about some ridiculous thing, his father said, about the waiter who spilled water on him at lunch. Even when he was stressed, he filled the house with noise. Then little by little, he stopped. He would come through the front door, loosen his tie, kiss Kiara on the cheek, and disappear into his office without saying much. At first, Kiara told herself he was just tired. Hunter's business had been slowing down for months. The younger developers in Houston were moving faster than he was. They were better with social media, better at selling themselves, better at making old ideas sound new. One afternoon, Hunter came home early and found Kiara in the kitchen making a grocery list. "You're home early," she said. He dropped his briefcase by the door. The Wilson project fell through. Kiara looked up. "The shopping center?" He nodded once. "I thought they were supposed to sign this week." "So did I." He opened the refrigerator, stared inside for a second, then shut it again without taking anything out. What happened? Hunter gave a humorless laugh. They decided to go with some 32-year-old guy who wears sneakers with suits and talks about disruption every 5 minutes. Kiara leaned against the counter. I'm sorry. He shrugged, like it didn't matter. But later that night, she heard him in the shower longer than usual. And when he finally came to bed, he lay awake staring at the ceiling. Meanwhile, her own company kept growing. At first, it had only been local contracts. Then one regional distributor recommended her to another, then another. By the beginning of that year, Kiara's logistics company had become one of the most respected transportation firms in Houston. She hired more people, moved into a larger office, started getting invited to events she used to avoid. The attention made her uncomfortable, but she could not avoid all of it. One Friday afternoon, she came home and found Hunter sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through his phone. You know you made Houston Business Monthly? He asked without looking up. Kiara stopped. What? He turned the phone toward her. There she was, a photo she barely remembered taking at some networking event. Next to the headline, Women Changing the Future of Houston Business. Kiara sighed. I told them not to use that picture. Hunter smiled, but it looked forced. You look nice. She set her purse down. It's not a big deal. Apparently it is. He put the phone face down on the counter. She walked over and touched his arm. Hunter. I'm proud of you, he said quickly, too quickly, like he wanted credit for saying it before he could feel something else. That night, while they were getting ready for bed, Kiara caught him standing in front of the bathroom mirror. He was staring at himself. You okay? She asked. He looked away. Yeah, but she could tell he wasn't. The next few months were full of moments like that. At a charity lunch downtown, a woman from one of Kiara's contracts walked over to their table. Kiara, she said brightly, I have been trying to get a meeting with you for weeks. Kiara smiled politely. I've just been busy. The woman looked at Hunter. You must be so proud. Your wife is incredible. Hunter smiled. Yeah, she is. But the second the woman walked away, he picked up his water glass and stared down at it. On the drive home, he was quiet. Too quiet. What? Kiara finally asked. Nothing. You've been saying nothing a lot lately. His jaw tightened. I'm just tired. No. You're upset. He kept his eyes on the road. I'm not upset. Then why are you acting like I did something wrong? Hunter let out a short laugh. Everything isn't about you, Kiara. The words sat between them, cold, sharp. She looked out the window and said nothing the rest of the drive. A week later, they went to dinner with 2 other couples. One of Hunter's friends, Mark, had just gotten engaged. Everybody was drinking too much wine and talking too loudly. Kiara had spent most of the night listening, while the men talked about work. At one point, Mark looked over at her. So, Kiara, I heard your company just landed that new contract with the port. She smiled politely. We did. That's huge. Hunter took a sip of his drink. It's been keeping her busy. Mark laughed. Man, I swear she's out here making all of us look bad. Everybody laughed a little, even Kiara, but she saw Hunter's expression change for half a second. Later that night, after they got home, Kiara stood in the bathroom taking off her earrings while Hunter changed clothes in the bedroom. You were quiet tonight, she said. I was fine. You weren't. He walked into the bathroom doorway. What do you want me to say? The truth. He looked at her for a long moment. Then finally, I don't like how people talk to me now. Kiara turned around slowly. What does that mean? He crossed his arms. It means every time we're around people, they act like you're the important one. She stared at him. Hunter. I'm serious. Nobody thinks that. They do. He started pacing. They ask about your business. They talk about your company. They act like I'm just... He stopped. Just what? He looked away. Nothing. But she knew. Just the husband. Just the man standing beside her. Kiara walked toward him. You are not less than me. He laughed. Once. You don't get it. Then explain it to me. You walk into a room, and everybody respects you." She frowned. "They respect you too." "No, they don't." His voice got louder. "They respect what you've become." The room went quiet. Kiara looked at him, because underneath the anger, underneath the frustration, there was something else. Shame, and she knew that feeling. She had spent her whole life trying not to let anybody see hers, but instead of saying that, she stepped closer and touched his hand. "We're supposed to be on the same side." For a second, she thought he might soften. Instead, he pulled his hand away. "Maybe that's easy for you to say." The next morning, he acted like the argument had never happened. He kissed her goodbye before work. He texted her around noon, "Sorry about last night, just stressed." She stared at the message for a long time before replying, "I know." But after that, the little arguments came more often, about stupid things, the dishes, the thermostat, how much she worked. One night, she came home late after a meeting and found him sitting in the living room. "You know," he said, "most people don't answer emails at 10 o'clock at night." She set her purse down. "Most people don't have employees depending on them. You always have an excuse." She stared at him. "Excuse for what?" "For not being here." Kiara laughed softly because she could not believe what she was hearing. "I'm not here?" "Hunter, I live here." "You know what I mean." "No, actually I don't." He stood up. "You're always working." "And you aren't?" "That's different." She folded her arms. "How?" He opened his mouth, then shut it again, because he did not have an answer that would not reveal the real problem. The real problem was that Kiara's success had stopped feeling like something he could be proud of. Now it felt like proof of everything he thought he was failing to be. A month later, they went to a dinner party at Mark's house. There were 10 people around the table, too much wine, and one of those expensive charcuterie boards nobody actually eats. Halfway through dinner, the conversation turned to work again. One of the women at the table looked at Kiara. "I saw your interview online. You're kind of a big deal now." Kiara shook her head. "I'm really not." "Please," Mark said. "You got half the city calling you." Then he looked at Hunter and grinned. "My man, at this point, we should all just start calling you Mr. Kiara." The whole table burst out laughing. For 1 second, nobody noticed Hunter stop smiling. Then he laughed too loud, too long. He raised his glass. "Trust me," he said. "It's not as fun as it sounds." On the drive home from Mark's house, Hunter barely spoke. The city lights slid across the windshield. Kiara sat in the passenger seat with her arms folded, watching his reflection in the glass. "You didn't have to say that," she said quietly. Hunter kept his eyes on the road. "Say what?" "It's not as fun as it sounds." He let out a short breath through his nose. "It was a joke." "No, it wasn't." The car went quiet again. Kiara turned toward the window. By the time they got home, neither of them said another word. After that night, something shifted. Hunter started staying out later. At first, it was work dinners, networking events, meetings that somehow always ran long. Then it became random excuses. A friend needed help. A client wanted to grab a drink. Traffic was bad. He always sounded annoyed when he explained it, like her asking where he had been was somehow unreasonable. One Thursday night, he came home after 11. Kiara was sitting on the couch with the television on low and a blanket over her legs. "You okay?" she asked. He dropped his keys in the bowl by the door. "Fine. You said you'd be home by 8. I got held up." "Doing what?" Hunter loosened his tie. "Why does it matter?" Kiara stared at him. "Because you're my husband." For a second, she saw something flash across his face. Guilt. Then it disappeared. "I'm tired," he said. "I don't want to do this tonight." He walked upstairs before she could answer. 2 weeks later, Hunter met Vanessa. It happened at a rooftop bar in River Oaks, after one of those commercial real estate mixers he had almost not gone to. He had spent the whole night watching younger men in tighter suits talk louder than him. Every conversation felt like a reminder. Somebody else had gotten the project. Somebody else had the investors. Somebody else was winning. By the time he got to the bar afterward, he already felt angry. Not at anybody in particular, just angry. He was halfway through his second drink when a woman slid onto the stool beside him. She wore a bright red dress and gold earrings that caught the light every time she moved her head. She looked at him, smiled, and said, "You have the face of a man who either just lost a lot of money or got trapped talking to somebody who calls himself a visionary." Hunter laughed, despite himself. "The second one. That's worse." She held out her hand. "Vanessa!" "Hunter!" She ordered another drink without even looking at the menu. Everything about her seemed practiced. The way she smiled, the way she touched his arm when she laughed, the way she acted like whatever he said was the most interesting thing she had ever heard. "What do you do?" he asked. "I own an online fashion company." Hunter nodded. "What kind?" "Luxury resale, vintage pieces, designer stuff." She said it casually, like she was used to people being impressed. And Hunter was, not because of what she said, because of how she said it. Vanessa talked like somebody who had never doubted herself a day in her life. By the end of the night, she knew more about him than she should have, that his business had been struggling, that he felt like people saw him differently now, that his wife was successful, too successful maybe. Hunter did not mean to say that last part, but Vanessa looked at him with those wide, sympathetic eyes and said exactly what he needed to hear. "That must be hard." He looked at her. "What?" She leaned a little closer. "Being married to somebody who makes you feel small." The sentence landed somewhere deep because Hunter had been feeling that way for months. He had just never said it out loud before. Vanessa reached for her drink. A lot of women don't know how to let a man be a man anymore. Hunter should have heard the warning in that sentence. He should have heard how small it was, how empty. Instead, he felt relieved. Finally, somebody understood. After that, he started seeing her. At first, he told himself it was harmless. A drink after work, a few texts, nothing serious. Then it became lunches, then hotel rooms, then entire evenings he lied about. Vanessa always knew exactly what to say. When he complained about Kiara working too much, Vanessa shook her head. A woman should know how to make her man feel important. When he said he felt like nobody respected him anymore, she touched his face and said, "I do." When he admitted that people in Houston had started talking more about Kiara than him, Vanessa laughed softly. They're only impressed by her because they don't know what a real man looks like. He should have known then, but Hunter was not looking for truth. He was looking for relief. Vanessa became a fantasy. She looked like the kind of woman he thought successful men were supposed to have. Beautiful, stylish, always perfectly dressed. She posted pictures online from expensive restaurants and luxury hotels. She talked about business meetings in Miami and shopping in New York. When she showed him a photo of herself standing beside a white Mercedes with a designer bag on her arm, he believed her. He wanted to believe her, because if Vanessa was real, then maybe everything he had been telling himself was real too. Maybe Kiara really had made him feel small. Maybe he really deserved better. Maybe he had not ruined his own life. Maybe he was the victim. The lies got easier after that. At home, Hunter started finding fault in everything. The way Kiara answered work emails during dinner, the way she corrected him when he exaggerated stories, the way she stayed calm when he was upset. One Saturday morning, they were in the kitchen when he snapped at her over nothing. Kiara had just reminded him that dinner with his parents was at 6. "I know what time dinner is," he said sharply. She looked up from the coffee maker. "Okay. You don't have to talk to me like I'm an idiot." Kiara blinked. "I wasn't." "You always do that." "What are you talking about?" He waved his hand angrily. "That look." "What look?" "That look like you're better than me." For a second, she just stared at him. Then she said quietly, "Hunter, I have never looked at you like that." But he no longer believed her, because he had started telling himself a different story. And the more time he spent with Vanessa, the easier that story became to believe. At bars with his friends, he started talking about Kiara differently, like she was the problem, like she was the reason he was unhappy. One night, he sat at a table with Mark and 2 other men from work. After a few drinks, he leaned back in his chair and said, "I think I'm done." Mark looked at him. "Done with what?" "My marriage." The table went quiet. Hunter took another drink. "Kiara and I..." He shrugged. "We're not right for each other anymore." "What happened?" one of the men asked. Hunter laughed bitterly. Nothing happened. That's the problem. He looked down at his glass. She's cold. Everything is business with her. She doesn't know how to make somebody feel wanted. None of it was true. Not really. But once he said it out loud, he kept going. She acts like she knows everything. Mark frowned. Man, I always thought you two were solid. We were, Hunter said. Then after a second, until I met somebody else. That got their attention. He smiled for the first time all night. You should see her. He pulled out his phone and showed them a picture of Vanessa. Red dress, long hair, bright smile. One of the men let out a low whistle. Damn. Hunter sat back in his chair. She actually knows how to appreciate me. The words made him feel powerful for a moment, like he had taken something back. Then he started talking bigger, louder. He told them Vanessa owned a successful fashion company. He told them she made more money than Kiara. He told them he was finally with somebody who matched him. Every lie made the next one easier. A week later, he was at Vanessa's apartment while she stood in front of the mirror, putting on lipstick. The apartment looked expensive at first glance. Tall windows, white furniture, designer bags on a shelf. But if he had paid attention, he would have noticed little things. The tag still hanging off one of the bags, the stack of overdue bills on the kitchen counter, the fact that she always avoided letting him come over before she had time to straighten up. Instead, he stood behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. My father's birthday ball is next month, he said. Vanessa smiled at him through the mirror. And I want you to come. She turned around slowly. Really? Hunter nodded. He thought she would be touched. Instead, something unreadable passed across her face. Then she smiled again. Are you sure? Hunter thought about Kiara, about the way she had looked at him lately. Calm, patient, sad. He thought about Mark calling him Mr. Kiara. He thought about all the ways he had felt small. Then he looked at Vanessa in that red dress and made the worst decision of his life. Yeah, he said. I'm sure. Kiara found out the way women usually do, not because Hunter confessed, because other people always know before you do. It started on a Saturday morning at Miss Tanya's salon. The salon was loud the way it always was. Hair dryers running, somebody arguing about reality television, somebody else complaining about gas prices, the smell of hairspray and coffee hanging in the air. Kiara sat in the second chair by the window while Miss Tanya parted her hair. You hear about Cheryl's son? The woman in the next chair asked. No, what happened now? He'd moved back in with her at 36. The whole salon groaned. Miss Tanya pointed her comb dramatically. See? That's why I don't let no grown man bring his mail to my house. Everybody laughed. Kiara smiled faintly and looked down at her phone. Then she heard her name, not directly, just enough to make her look up. The woman near the dryers lowered her voice. I don't know if I would have handled it as calmly as she did. As who did? Another woman asked. The first woman glanced toward Kiara, then away. You know, Hunter's wife. The room got quiet for half a second. Miss Tanya cleared her throat. All right now, we not doing that in here. But it was too late. Kiara turned slowly in the chair. What are you talking about? Nobody answered right away. The woman by the dryers looked embarrassed. I probably shouldn't have said nothing. Kiara held her gaze. Said what? Miss Tanya set the comb down. Baby. No, Kiara said quietly. Tell me. The woman shifted uncomfortably. My sister saw Hunter at a restaurant in River Oaks last week. Kiara stared at her. With who? The woman hesitated. Another woman. The words landed strangely, not like a slap, more like missing a step in the dark. For a second, Kiara felt nothing at all. Then Miss Tanya touched her shoulder. It could have been somebody from work. But nobody in the room believed that, not even Miss Tanya. Kiara smiled. A small, polite smile that did not belong on her face. I'm sure it was. Then she turned back toward the mirror. Nobody said much after that. When her appointment was over, Miss Tanya hugged her longer than usual. Call me if you need me. Kiara nodded, but she did not call anybody. She went home. Hunter was in the kitchen making coffee when she walked in. You were gone forever, he said lightly. She looked at him. at the same face she had looked at for years, the same mouth that kissed her goodbye in the mornings, the same hands she used to hold when he was scared. And suddenly, for the first time, he looked unfamiliar. "Traffic," she said. He nodded and turned back toward the coffee maker. That night, he fell asleep beside her while she lay awake staring at the ceiling. At 2 a.m, she heard his phone buzz on the nightstand. Hunter was asleep. The screen lit up for only a second, but it was enough. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. No name, just a number." Kiara stared at the message until the screen went dark again. Then she turned over and closed her eyes. 3 days later, she was sitting in her car outside the grocery store when her phone buzzed. It was a text from one of Hunter's friends. At least, she thought it was for her. Then she opened it. "You really gonna bring Vanessa to the ball? That's cold." Kiara stared at the screen. Then, another message came immediately after. Shit. Wrong person. For a long time, she just sat there. The air conditioner was running. Somebody in the next parking space was loading groceries into their trunk. A little boy somewhere nearby was crying because he wanted candy. And somehow, the whole world kept moving like nothing had happened. Kiara looked down at the text again. "Bring Vanessa to the ball." The ball. Hunter's father's birthday party. The one at the Westin downtown. The one where both families would be there. His friends. His parents. People from work. People from church. People who had watched their marriage for years. He was not just cheating. He wanted an audience. That was the moment something inside her broke. Not because he loved someone else. Because he wanted to humiliate her. Kiara sat in that parking lot for almost 20 minutes. She did not cry. She just stared through the windshield while the same thought kept repeating in her head. How long has he been trying to make me the villain in a story I didn't even know we were telling? When she finally got home, she found her mother in the kitchen. Denise had let herself in with the spare key and was standing at the stove stirring something in a pot. "You look tired," her mother said without turning around. Kiara set her purse down. "I'm fine." Denise looked over her shoulder. "No, you're not." For a second, Kiara thought about lying. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and handed her mother the phone. Denise read the message. Her face went still. Then very slowly, she set the phone down. "I knew something wasn't right with him." Kiara looked up. "You knew?" Denise sighed. "I didn't know this, but the last few times I saw him." She shook her head. "He looked at you like somebody who was angry at a person for helping him." Kiara swallowed hard. Her mother sat across from her. "You need to leave him." Just like that. No speech, no hesitation. Kiara looked down at the table. "After everything?" Denise's voice softened. "Baby, after everything is exactly why." Later that night, Aunt Celeste came over with a bottle of wine and enough anger for 3 people. "He did what?" she shouted. Kiara winced. "Aunt Celeste." No, because I knew that man was too worried about what people think." She stood up and started pacing through the kitchen. "He want to embarrass you in front of everybody? Good, let him try." "I don't want drama." "You already got drama. You just the only one wasn't invited." Kiara almost laughed. Almost. Aunt Celeste sat down beside her and took her hand. "You spent years building that man up." "I know. And what did he do with it?" Kiara looked away. The next day, her best friend Renee came over. Renee had known Kiara since they were 14. She was the kind of friend who told the truth, even when it hurt. The two of them sat on Kiara's back porch while the sun went down. Kiara had finally cried by then, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like she was embarrassed by it. Renee handed her a tissue. "You know what's making you cry the hardest?" Kiara looked at her. "You still think, if you had been different, this wouldn't have happened?" Kiara looked down. Renee leaned back in the chair. "Let me save you a few years of misery. This is not about what you didn't give him." She wiped her eyes. "Then what is it about?" Renee was quiet for a second. "It's about the fact that you've spent your whole marriage protecting a man from his own insecurities." Kiara looked out at the yard. The old swing in the corner moved a little in the wind. "You made yourself smaller so he could feel bigger," Renee said. "And now he's mad because even after all that, he still feels small." The words hurt because they were true. Renee reached for her hand. But do not let that man rewrite your whole marriage like you were never enough. Kiara sat very still. Then finally, she nodded once. The next morning, she got up before sunrise. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table with her laptop. And she started pulling up records, bank statements, wire transfers, mortgage papers, property deeds, business contracts, every check she had written for him, every account she had quietly covered, every loan she had guaranteed. At first, she told herself she was doing it for the divorce. But the truth was more complicated than that. She needed proof, not for the court, for herself, because somewhere along the way, Hunter had made her start questioning her own memory. Had she really done that much? Had she really carried that much? By noon, papers covered the entire dining room table. There was the mortgage statement with her name on the larger payment, the transfer records from her company into one of Hunter's failed developments, the receipt for Richard's hospital bills, the document showing that the investment property Hunter bragged about owning had actually been purchased through one of Kiara's holding companies. Kiara looked down at all of it. Years of sacrifice, years of silence, years of making herself smaller. Then she walked to the hall closet, pulled down an old manila envelope, and slid every piece of paper inside. She held the envelope in both hands for a long moment. Then she set it by the front door and waited for the night of the ball. The night of Richard's birthday ball. Houston was wrapped in that heavy spring heat that made the air feel thick even after the sun went down. Kiara stood in her bedroom staring at herself in the mirror. She wore the black dress she had almost worn to the fundraiser where she first met Hunter. It was simple, no sequins, no low neckline, just a clean black dress that fit well and made her feel like herself. For a long moment, she thought about taking it off. She could leave. She could tell Hunter she was sick. She could drive to her mother's house. She could let him humiliate himself without being there to watch it. But then she looked at the manila envelope sitting on the bed beside her, and she picked up her purse. Hunter was downstairs adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror when she came down. He looked up. For a second, something unreadable crossed his face. Guilt, maybe even shame. Then it disappeared. "You ready?" he asked. Kiara looked at him. He had worn the navy suit she bought him 3 Christmases ago, the one he always said made him look successful. "I'm ready," she said. The drive downtown was quiet. Hunter kept tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. Too fast, too restless. Every now and then, he checked his phone at a red light. Once, Kiara saw his mouth twitch like he was trying not to smile. Neither of them said much. The Weston ballroom was already crowded when they arrived. The room glowed gold under the chandeliers. White tablecloths, tall flower arrangements, a jazz band playing softly in the corner. Waiters moving through the crowd with trays of champagne. Everything looked expensive. Everything looked polished. The kind of room where people smiled too much and never said exactly what they meant. Richard stood near the front, shaking hands beside a giant banner with his company name printed across it. Diane stood next to him in a silver dress, greeting people with the same careful smile she had worn for years. When she saw Kiara and Hunter, she walked over immediately. "There you are," she said. Then she looked at Hunter. "You've been impossible to reach." "I've been busy," he said. Diane lowered her voice. "Well, tonight is not the night for surprises." Kiara almost laughed. If only she knew. They were seated at table 7 near the side of the room. Kiara sat between Aunt Celeste and Hunter. Across from them sat Mark and his wife. Renee was at another table near the dance floor, but every few minutes she looked over at Kiara with the same expression. "You okay?" Kiara nodded every time. No matter what, she was not going to let herself fall apart in front of these people. Hunter was acting strange, not nervous exactly. Worse, confident. He kept checking the entrance, checking his phone, smiling to himself. At one point, Aunt Celeste leaned close to Kiara. He looked like a man who think he got away with something. Kiara took a sip of water. "He does." Aunt Celeste looked at her. "You still got that envelope?" Kiara touched her purse lightly under the table. "Yes." "Good." Dinner came and went. Richard gave a long speech about hard work and family. Everybody clapped. Hunter barely listened. He kept glancing toward the ballroom doors. Then finally, a little after 9, the The room changed. It happened all at once. People near the entrance stopped talking. A few heads turned, then more. Kiara looked up, and there she was. Vanessa stood in the doorway in a bright red dress that looked like it had been chosen to make sure nobody looked anywhere else. The dress was tight, shiny, too much for the room, and exactly right for the kind of attention she wanted. Her hair fell in soft waves over one shoulder. Her lipstick matched the dress. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then the whispering started. "Who is that? Isn't that? Oh my God." Vanessa smiled like she was walking into a movie about herself. Then she looked across the room, straight at Hunter. Hunter stood up so quickly, he nearly knocked over his chair. Kiara felt Aunt Celeste go still beside her. Across the room, Diane's face drained of color. Richard looked confused. Hunter walked toward Vanessa without even glancing back at Kiara. The entire room watched. He reached her, said something that made her laugh. Then he touched the small of her back and led her into the ballroom. Right past his wife, Kiara sat perfectly still. The room around her sounded far away. Somebody dropped a fork. Somebody whispered, "He cannot be serious." Renee stood up halfway from her table like she was ready to come over, but Kiara shook her head once, "Not yet." Hunter brought Vanessa to table 7. Nobody spoke. Vanessa smiled brightly. "Hi," she said. "I've heard so much about everybody." Aunt Celeste let out a short laugh that sounded dangerous. "I bet you have." Hunter ignored her. He pulled out a chair for Vanessa and sat beside her. Not beside Kiara, beside Vanessa. The silence at the table was unbearable. Finally, Mark looked down into his drink. "Damn, man," he muttered under his breath. Hunter heard him. Instead of looking ashamed, he smiled. That was when Kiara knew something inside him had broken long before tonight. Because this was not just selfish. He was enjoying it. He wanted people to look at him. He wanted them to see that he had chosen someone else. He wanted to make Kiara sit there and feel small. Vanessa leaned toward Hunter and whispered something in his ear. He laughed. Then, for the first time all night, he looked at Kiara. There was something almost triumphant in his face. Like after years of feeling small beside her, this was the moment he finally believed he had won. Kiara looked back at him without blinking. Then she looked down at the envelope in her purse. Hunter stood up. He straightened his jacket. Then he walked toward the stage where the band had been playing. The room slowly went quiet, and Hunter reached for the microphone. The microphone squealed when Hunter grabbed it. A few people winced. The jazz band stopped packing up and turned toward the stage. The waiters froze where they were. Conversations died in the middle of sentences. Hunter stood under the ballroom lights with one hand in his pocket and the other wrapped around the microphone. For a second, he looked nervous. Then he looked down at Vanessa, sitting near the front in that red dress. And suddenly, he looked confident again. "I know tonight is supposed to be about my father," he said, glancing toward Richard. "And it is." A few people gave uncertain smiles. "But I think sometimes there comes a point in your life when you have to stop pretending." The room went quiet. At table 7, Kiara sat perfectly still. Aunt Celeste's hand slipped under the table and grabbed her wrist so tightly it almost hurt. Hunter looked out across the ballroom. "I've spent years pretending I'm happy." Nobody moved. Diane looked up sharply. Richard frowned. Hunter took a breath. "And the truth is..." He laughed softly, like he was embarrassed by his own honesty. "The truth is, I married the wrong woman." A sound moved through the room. Not quite a gasp, more like the whole ballroom inhaled at once. At table 7, Mark whispered, "Jesus Christ." Kiara stared at Hunter, at his face, at the man she had loved for years. He looked almost relieved, like he had been waiting to say these things. Hunter looked directly at her. "Kiara and I have been together a long time, and somewhere along the way, I think we both stopped being honest." His voice softened in a way that made it even crueler. "She's a good person." Kiara almost laughed, because people only say that when they are about to destroy you, but she was never really the woman I needed. Across the room, Renee stood up. Kiara shook her head once. "Not yet." Hunter kept going. "She never understood me. She never believed in me." Kiara blinked. The words hit her strangely, not because they hurt, because they were so completely untrue. She made me feel like nothing I did was ever enough. At the table, Aunt Celeste muttered, "This lying son of a—" Hunter looked down at Vanessa again. Then he smiled. But sometimes life gives you a second chance. And before anybody could stop him, he held out his hand toward Vanessa. Vanessa stood slowly. The room stared. Hunter pulled her up onto the stage beside him. "This is Vanessa," he said. She smiled and gave a little wave like she was being introduced at a baby shower. "And she is the woman who finally showed me what it feels like to be loved." Somebody near the back whispered, "Oh my God." Another person said, "No way." Diane covered her mouth with one hand. Richard looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. Vanessa slipped her arm through Hunter's, and then, right there in front of everyone, Hunter kissed her. The room exploded, not loudly, in whispers, in gasps, in the low, ugly sound people make when they know they are watching something they should not be seeing but cannot look away from. At another table, one of Diane's friends turned to her husband and whispered something with wide eyes. Mark stared down into his drink. Renee was already pushing her chair back. Aunt Celeste stood up so fast her napkin hit the floor. "I know this fool ain't." Kiara touched her arm. No. Her own voice surprised her. It was calm, too calm, because somewhere in the middle of Hunter's speech, the hurt had changed. At first, she had felt embarrassed, then shocked, then angry. But now, sitting there while Hunter stood on that stage acting like the victim in a story he created, she felt something else. Clarity. For years, she had protected him, protected his pride, protected his ego, protected him from the truth about himself. And what had he done with that protection? He had turned it into permission. Permission to blame her, permission to lie, permission to stand in front of everyone they knew and rewrite their marriage into something ugly so he would not have to face what he had become. Kiara looked around the ballroom, at the people staring, at Diane sitting frozen in her chair, at Richard, looking ashamed, at Vanessa smiling beside her husband like she had won something. Then Kiara looked down at the manila envelope in her purse. Her fingers closed around it. On stage, Hunter was still talking. "I know some people won't understand," he said. "But, at some point, you have to choose happiness." Kiara stood up. The movement was so quiet that almost nobody noticed at first. Then Renee saw her. Then Aunt Celeste. Then the people at the next table. Kiara smoothed one hand down the front of her black dress, picked up her purse, and started walking toward the stage. The room slowly fell silent again. Hunter saw her coming. For a second he smiled. He actually smiled, like he thought she was finally going to beg, or cry, or make a scene that would prove everything he had said about her. Vanessa crossed her arms and lifted her chin. Kiara stepped onto the stage. She stopped directly in front of Hunter, close enough now to see the faint sweat at his temples, close enough to smell the whiskey on his breath. Hunter gave a small, almost pitying smile. "Kiara." "Oh." She held out her hand. "Give me the microphone." For a second, Hunter did not move. The ballroom was so quiet Kiara could hear the hum of the air conditioner overhead. Hunter still had that same expression on his face, the one that said he thought he knew exactly who she was. He thought she was going to cry. He thought she was going to beg him not to do this. He thought she would stand there embarrassed and broken while he looked brave. "Kiara," he said softly, trying to sound reasonable, "don't do this." She held her hand out again. "Give me the microphone." Something in her voice made him hesitate. Then, slowly, he handed it to her. Kiara turned toward the crowd. She looked at the room full of people she had known for years. Her family, his family, friends, business contacts, people from church, people who had watched her love Hunter for almost a decade. Her hands were steady. Her voice did not shake. "You know what's interesting?" She said. Nobody moved. A man can spend years blaming the woman who stood beside him because it's easier than admitting he's ashamed of himself. A murmur passed through the room. Hunter's face changed immediately. "Kiara." She ignored him. "You said I never believed in you." She looked directly at him. "But every business deal you've made in the last 6 years was possible because of me." The room went silent again. Hunter blinked. "What are you talking about?" Kiara opened her purse. pulled out the manila envelope, and removed the first stack of papers. The Wilson development project that almost collapsed 3 years ago. She said, "I funded it." She held up a bank transfer. "You thought one of your old contacts saved you. He didn't. I moved the money through one of my business accounts because I knew you'd never accept it if you knew it came from me." Hunter stared at her. The color drained from his face. Kiara pulled out another paper. "The mortgage on our house? I've been paying most of it for years." A sharp breath somewhere in the crowd. Diane looked over at Hunter, then at Kiara, then back again. Kiara kept going. "The investment property you keep bragging about at dinner parties?" She held up another document. "Bought through one of my holding companies." Richard stood up slowly from his table. "What?" Kiara looked at him. "And your hospital bills after your surgery, Richard? The ones your family couldn't cover?" Richard looked stunned. "I paid those too." Diane's hand flew to her mouth. Hunter looked like somebody had punched him in the chest. "No," he said quietly. "No, that's not." "It is." Kiara's voice stayed calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "You said I made you feel small." She looked at him for a long moment. "But Hunter, I spent years making myself smaller so you could feel bigger." The room was completely still now. No whispers, no movement, just silence. Because everybody in that ballroom suddenly understood the same thing at once. Hunter had not been the provider. He had not been the successful one. He had been standing on Kiara's shoulders the entire time. Kiara held up another paper. "The business account you think is yours?" She said, "My name is on the guarantee." Another. "The credit line keeping your company afloat?" "Mine." Another. "The last 3 projects you told everybody you funded yourself?" She looked down at the documents, then back up at him. "Me." Hunter looked at her like he had never seen her before. "Why?" He whispered. The question almost made her laugh. Why? Because she loved him. Because she thought protecting him was the same thing as loving him. Because she thought if she carried enough, he would finally stop feeling like he was falling. But she did not say any of that. Instead, she said, "Because I was your wife." Hunter took a step toward her. "Kiara, I didn't know." "I know, and if I had." She looked at him. "No, don't do that." Her voice sharpened for the first time. "Do not stand here and act like the problem is that you didn't know." Hunter stopped. "The problem is that every time life made you feel insecure, you found somebody else to blame." She turned, then, slowly, toward Vanessa. Vanessa had gone pale. The confident smile was gone. Her arms were crossed tightly across her chest. Kiara looked at her for a second. Then she said, very calmly, "And before you embarrass yourself any further, maybe you should tell him the truth too." Vanessa's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" Kiara pulled one last sheet of paper from the envelope. "I spent 2 weeks learning that my husband has terrible taste in women." A few people in the room laughed before quickly stopping themselves. Kiara looked down at the paper. "Vanessa does not own a fashion company." Vanessa's face changed instantly. Hunter turned toward her. "What?" Kiara kept reading. "The company she told you about was dissolved last year." She looked up. "The Mercedes she posts online belongs to her ex-boyfriend." Vanessa took a step back. "That's not true." "The designer bags?" Kiara said, "Rented." Vanessa's face flushed bright red. Hunter stared at her. What is she talking about? Vanessa looked at him, then away. "Vanessa?" She swallowed hard. "It's not like that." Hunter laughed once, a short, broken sound. "What do you mean it's not like that?" Kiara watched his face carefully, because there it was, the exact moment he realized he had destroyed his life for a fantasy. Vanessa was not rich. She was not successful. She was not the glamorous woman he had imagined. She was just another person pretending, just like him. Vanessa grabbed her purse. "I don't have to stand here for this." "No," Aunt Celeste called from the audience. "You probably don't." A few people laughed. Vanessa walked quickly toward the exit without looking at anyone. The ballroom doors slammed shut behind her. Hunter stood frozen on the stage. His face was gray. His eyes looked wet. For the first time all night, he looked exactly like what he was. Not powerful, not victorious, just a scared, insecure man who had spent years blaming everyone else for the parts of himself he hated. Kiara folded the papers carefully and slid them back into the envelope. Then she looked at him one last time. "I loved you," she said quietly. Hunter's face crumpled. "And I loved you enough to disappear inside this marriage." Her voice broke then, just slightly. "But that was my mistake." He stepped toward her. "Kiara, please." She shook her head. "I'll have the divorce papers sent Monday." Then she handed him the microphone, turned, and walked off the stage. The ballroom doors had barely closed behind Kiara when she heard Hunter's footsteps behind her. "Kiara!" She kept walking. The hallway outside the ballroom was quieter, dimmer, thick carpet, gold wallpaper, the distant sound of elevator doors opening and closing. Her heels clicked against the floor. "Kiara, wait." She stopped near the end of the hallway, but did not turn around right away. When she finally looked at him, Hunter looked nothing like the man who had stood on that stage 10 minutes earlier. His tie was loose. His face was pale. His eyes were red. For the first time all night, he looked scared. "Please," he said. Kiara stood there, holding the manila envelope against her chest. "Please what?" Hunter opened his mouth, then closed it again, because for once in his life, there was no easy thing to say. "I don't know," he whispered. The words surprised both of them. Hunter looked down at the floor. "I don't know what to say." Kiara let out a short laugh that sounded more tired than angry. "That's funny." He looked up. "Why?" "Because you've had plenty to say about me lately." Hunter flinched. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then suddenly, all the arrogance was gone. "I messed up." Kiara stared at him. "No," she said quietly. "You lied. You cheated. You humiliated me in front of everyone we know." Hunter shook his head quickly. I know. "No, you don't." He ran both hands through his hair. "I do. I swear, I do." His voice cracked. And then, finally, the truth came out. Not all at once, slowly, like something rotten finally splitting open. "I felt." He stopped and swallowed hard. "I felt small." Kiara looked at him. "I know." "No, you don't." Hunter leaned against the wall and covered his face with one hand. "Everywhere we went, people talked about you." His voice was shaking now. "Your company, your success, your name." He laughed bitterly. "And every time somebody looked at you like you were impressive, I felt like they were looking at me and seeing everything I wasn't." Kiara stood very still, because there it was, the thing she had spent years protecting him from. "I know that's pathetic," he said. "I know. I hated myself for it." His eyes filled with tears. "And instead of dealing with it, I made it your fault." The words hung in the hallway. Kiara looked at him for a long moment. Then she said the thing she had never said out loud. "I spent our whole marriage trying to make sure you never felt that way." Hunter looked up. "What?" She shook her head slowly. "I paid your bills. I fixed your mistakes. I hid my own success because I thought if you knew how much I had, how much I was doing, it would hurt you." His face twisted. "Kiara, I let you think you were carrying me." Tears were running down his face now. "I didn't know." "You didn't want to know." Her voice stayed calm, but there was years of hurt underneath it. "You wanted to believe you were the provider. You wanted to believe you were the reason our life worked." She stepped closer. "So, I let you." Hunter wiped at his face. "Why would you do that?" Kiara looked at him like she was exhausted. "Because I loved you." The words nearly broke him. He pressed both hands over his mouth. For a second, all he could do was cry. Not loudly, just the quiet, ugly kind of crying that comes when somebody finally sees themselves clearly and hates what they see. "I loved you," Kiara said again, "and I thought that meant protecting you." She looked down at the envelope in her hands. "But all I really did was teach you that you could take from me without ever having to look at yourself." Hunter shook his head desperately. "No, please don't say that." "It's true." "No, I can fix this." Kiara almost smiled, not because it was funny, because it was heartbreaking. After everything, he still thought there was something to fix. A conversation, a promise, An apology, like what happened tonight had been a mistake. But it had not been a mistake. It had been a decision. "I was jealous of you," he said suddenly. The words came out rough and ugly. "I hated how calm you were. I hated how people respected you. I hated that you always seemed stronger than me." Kiara looked away. "Do you know what the saddest part is?" Hunter shook his head. "I wasn't stronger than you." She looked back at him. "I was just carrying both of us." He started crying harder then. "Please," he whispered. "Please, don't leave me." The old version of Kiara would have broken at that. The old version would have reached for him, would have held him, would have said it was going to be okay. But the old version of Kiara was the woman who had spent years disappearing. So she just stood there. "I have spent my whole life making myself smaller," she said quietly. "My mother did it. My grandmother did it. Every woman I knew taught me that love meant sacrifice." She looked at him with tears in her own eyes now. "But I finally understand something." Hunter stared at her. "If somebody can only love you when you're less than you are, then they don't love you." He closed his eyes. "No. You didn't want a wife, Hunter." Her voice broke. "You wanted an audience." The words hit him harder than anything else she had said, because he knew they were true. He had wanted someone to admire him, to make him feel important, to make him feel like enough. And when Kiara's love was no longer enough to hide how he felt about himself, he had gone looking for somebody easier, somebody who would lie to him, somebody he could stand next to and still feel bigger. Hunter slid down against the wall until he was sitting on the carpet in the hallway. He looked suddenly older, smaller, the man Kiara had spent years trying to save. "Kiara," he whispered one last time. She looked down at him. For a second she saw every version of him at once. The man who made her laugh in the parking lot after the fundraiser, the man who danced with her in the kitchen, the man who sat on the edge of their bed and admitted he was scared, and the man who stood on a stage and tried to destroy her so he would not have to face himself. Then she took a breath, turned, and walked away. By the next morning, everybody knew. Kiara woke up at her mother's house to the sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand. She had come there after leaving the hotel. Around midnight, she had shown up at Denise's front door, still wearing the black dress, still carrying the manila envelope. Her mother opened the door, looked at her face, and did not ask a single question. She just stepped aside and said, "Come inside." Now it was barely 8 in the morning, and Kiara's phone had already lit up 15 times. Miss Tanya, Renee, 2 cousins, 3 people from church, an old friend she had not spoken to in years. She stared at the screen, then turned the phone face down again. From the kitchen she could hear Aunt Celeste's voice. "I don't care if Richard embarrassed. He should be embarrassed. He raised him." Denise sighed. "Celeste, stop yelling before she wakes up." "I'm not yelling. This is just how I talk." Kiara smiled despite herself. When she walked into the kitchen, Aunt Celeste immediately stood up. "There she is." She wrapped her arms around Kiara so tightly she could barely breathe. "You okay?" "No," Kiara said honestly. Aunt Celeste nodded. "Good. That means you still got sense." By noon, the story had traveled through half of Houston. People who had not been at the ballroom somehow knew every detail. Some versions said Hunter had left with Vanessa. Others said Vanessa slapped him. One person swore Kiara had thrown a drink in his face. Renee called around lunchtime. "You should hear the stories people are telling." Kiara sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee she had not touched. "I don't want to. The best one is that Vanessa turned out to be wanted in 3 states. For the first time all day, Kiara laughed. "Please stop." "I'm serious. Somebody's aunt made the whole thing up." The laughter disappeared as quickly as it came. Renee got quiet. "How are you really?" Kiara looked out the window. Her mother's backyard looked exactly the same as it had when she was little. The old tree, the broken bird feeder, the chair Denise always said she was going to throw away, and never did. "I don't know," she said, and that was the truth. She was angry, humiliated, relieved, heartbroken, all at once. Later that afternoon, Hunter called. She let it ring. Then he called again, and again. By the 4th time, Denise picked up the phone off the table and looked at the screen. You want me to answer it? Kiara shook her head. No. Her mother stared at the phone for a second, then blocked his number. Meanwhile, across town, Hunter sat alone in the house. The same house that had felt too quiet for months now felt unbearable. Every room looked different. The kitchen where Kiara drank coffee in the mornings, the living room where she fell asleep with her laptop, the hallway where she always left her shoes. There were pieces of her everywhere, and for the first time, he understood how much of his life had been built around her. His phone would not stop ringing either, but unlike Kiara's, the calls were not kind. His father called first. Hunter stared at the screen for almost a full minute before answering. Hello? There was a long silence. Then Richard said, very quietly, What the hell is wrong with you? Hunter closed his eyes. Dad. No, don't call me Dad right now. Richard almost never raised his voice. That somehow made it worse. You humiliated your wife. You humiliated this family. You humiliated me. Hunter rubbed his forehead. I know. No, you don't. The same words Kiara had said. Richard let out a long breath. That woman paid my hospital bills. Hunter said nothing. Did you know that? His throat tightened. No. Another silence. Then Richard said something Hunter had never heard in his life. I was proud of her. Hunter closed his eyes. And now every time I think about the way you treated her, it makes me sick. The line went dead. An hour later, Diane came over. Hunter heard her heels in the hallway before he saw her. When she walked into the kitchen, she looked different, not polished, not composed, just tired. She stood across from him at the counter. Your father won't speak to you. Hunter looked down. I know. Diane folded her arms. For years, I thought Kiara was wrong for you. He looked up. She laughed once, a sad, bitter sound. I thought she was too strong, too independent, too different from what I imagined. Hunter stared at her, and then last night, I realized. Diane's voice shook. She was the best thing that ever happened to you. Hunter looked away. His mother sat down slowly at the table. When did you become this person? He wanted to answer, wanted to tell her about feeling small, about feeling invisible, about all the ugly things he had been carrying around, but none of it sounded like enough. So he just sat there. Across town, Vanessa had disappeared. Her number no longer worked. Her social media accounts were gone by Monday morning. When Hunter drove by her apartment building, the manager told him she had moved out. 2 days ago, the woman said she was going to Dallas. Hunter stood in the parking lot staring at the empty windows of her apartment. That was when it finally hit him. Vanessa had never loved him. She had loved the version of him he pretended to be. The successful man, the powerful man, the man with the big house and the nice car and the money. Except none of those things had really been his. By the end of the week, the truth started unraveling everywhere. The mortgage company called. The house was in both names, but most of the equity came from Kiara. The lawyer explained that the investment property Hunter had bragged about for years legally belonged to one of Kiara's companies. Then his accountant called. You know that line of credit you've been using for the business? Yeah. There was a pause. It was secured through your wife's company. Hunter sat down slowly. What? The accountant cleared his throat. Without her guarantee, you're going to have a problem. By Friday, 3 deals had fallen apart. 2 investors stopped returning his calls. One of his biggest clients said they were going in a different direction. People in Houston had seen what happened at the ballroom, and maybe they did not care about the affair. People forgive affairs. What they did not forgive was weakness. And now, everybody knew the truth. Hunter had spent years pretending to be a man he was not. Friday night, he sat alone in the house. The same navy suit from the ballroom still hung over the back of a chair in the bedroom. Kiara's coffee mug was still in the dishwasher. One of her earrings was still sitting on the bathroom counter. Hunter picked it up. Just a small gold hoop, the kind she wore every day. He sat down on the edge of the bed, holding it in his hand. Then he looked around the room, and for the first time in his life, there was nobody left to blame for what he had destroyed. Kiara filed for divorce the following Monday, not because she woke up angry, Not because Aunt Celeste wanted revenge, not because everybody kept telling her she deserved better. She filed because when she woke up that morning, she felt something she had not felt in years. Clear. She sat at her mother's kitchen table in sweatpants with a cup of coffee and stared at the paperwork her lawyer had emailed over. Her lawyer, Sandra, had been recommended by one of Kiara's clients. She was sharp, practical, and did not waste time. "You have more than enough documentation," Sandra said over the phone. "Honestly, this is one of the cleanest cases I've seen." Kiara looked down at the manila envelope beside her, the same envelope that had sat in her purse at the ballroom. "I don't want to destroy him," she said quietly. Sandra was silent for a second. "Then don't." Kiara frowned. "But don't confuse protecting him with protecting yourself." Those words stayed with her. By the end of the day, the papers were filed. Hunter called as soon as he found out. This time, Kiara answered. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, "Please, don't do this." Kiara closed her eyes. "Hunter, I know I don't deserve another chance." "You're right." He made a sound like the truth had knocked the breath out of him. "But please, just talk to me." Against her better judgment, she agreed. They met 2 days later at a small coffee shop, halfway between her mother's house and his office. The place was quiet, mostly college students and people pretending to work on laptops. Kiara got there first. When Hunter walked in, she barely recognized him. He looked thinner, tired, like he had not slept since the night of the ball. For a second, he just stood there, looking at her. Then he sat down. "You look good," he said. Kiara looked out the window. "Don't." He nodded. "Okay." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The waitress came by. Hunter ordered coffee. Kiara did not want anything. Finally, he looked at her. "I've been trying to figure out when everything went wrong." Kiara gave a small, sad smile. "You really don't know?" He looked down. "I think it started when I stopped feeling good enough." She waited, and instead of admitting that, "I made it your fault." There was no anger in his voice now, just exhaustion. "I know I was jealous of you," he said quietly. "I know I hated how strong you were." Kiara looked at him. "I was never trying to make you feel weak." "I know." He looked down at his hands. "I just—" He swallowed hard. "Every time you succeeded, I felt like I was disappearing." Kiara sat very still, because part of her understood that, not the affair, not the cruelty, but the shame. She had spent her whole life around people who could not stand feeling less than somebody else, men who thought love was a competition, women who made themselves smaller to keep the peace. The difference was, she had spent years trying not to become one of those people. Hunter had not. "I loved you," he said. Kiara looked at him. "I know you did." Hunter looked surprised. "Then why are you doing this?" For a second she almost laughed, not because it was funny, because he still did not understand. Trust had not died when he met Vanessa. It had not even died when he cheated. Trust died slowly. Every time she saved him, and he let himself believe he had done it alone. Every time he looked at her success and saw an insult instead of a blessing. Every time he made her feel guilty for being strong. And finally, the night he stood in front of everybody they knew and tried to turn her into the villain because he could not face himself. Kiara leaned forward. "Do you know when I stopped believing we could survive this?" Hunter looked at her. "The moment you took that microphone." His face crumpled. "Kiara, you cheated on me. That was awful." Her voice stayed calm. "But people survive affairs." She looked down at the table. "What they don't survive is finding out the person they love has been quietly resenting them for years." Hunter covered his face with his hands. She kept going. "You did not just betray me." She looked back up. "You tried to erase me." The words sat between them. Hunter started crying again. He cried more easily now, like once something inside him finally broke, he could not put it back together. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know. No, I mean it. I know." Kiara meant that too. For the first time, she believed he was sorry. But sorry was not the same thing as changed. And it was definitely not the same thing as safe. Hunter looked at her with tears in his eyes. "What if I go to therapy?" You should. What if I change? I hope you do. He stared at her, but not for me. The silence that followed was the kind that only exists when two people finally stop lying to each other. After a while, Hunter reached into his jacket pocket. I brought something. He slid a small set of keys across the table. Kiara looked down. The house keys. I know most of it's yours anyway, he said quietly. She stared at the keys for a second, then pushed them back toward him. No. Hunter looked confused. I don't want the house. What? She looked out the window. I love that house because I built a life there with you. Her voice shook slightly. But I don't want to spend the next 10 years walking through rooms full of ghosts. Hunter stared at her. So what happens now? Kiara looked at him. Now, for the first time in years, she did not know exactly what came next. And strangely, that did not scare her. Now, she said softly, we let go. The divorce took 4 months. There were meetings, paperwork, lawyers, boxes. Kiara moved into a townhouse near Midtown with big windows and too much empty space. For the first few weeks, she hated how quiet it was. Then slowly, she started to realize the quiet felt different when it did not come with loneliness. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday morning in a courtroom that smelled like old paper and air conditioning. Hunter wore a gray suit. Kiara wore navy blue. The judge asked a few questions. They answered. Then, just like that, it was over. Outside the courthouse, they stood awkwardly on the steps for a moment. Cars moved through downtown traffic. Somebody nearby was talking too loudly on their phone. Hunter looked at her. I really did love you, he said. Kiara looked back at him. I know. Then after a second, she said the thing she wished she had understood years earlier. But love is not the same thing as knowing how to take care of somebody. Hunter looked down, and this time, when she walked away, he did not follow her. By the end of summer, the worst part was over. Not because Kiara had stopped hurting. She had not. There were still mornings when she woke up and reached for her phone before remembering there was nobody to text. Still nights when she heard a song in the grocery store and had to leave her cart in the middle of the aisle because it reminded her of driving to Galveston with Hunter. Still moments when she walked past a restaurant and thought, we went there once. Grief was strange like that. People thought it came all at once. But really, it came in little pieces. A coffee mug, a certain street, the sound of a garage door opening. The first few months after the divorce, Kiara kept herself busy. Too busy. She threw herself into work, stayed late at the office, took on more contracts than she needed to. One evening, Renee came by the townhouse and found Kiara sitting on the floor in sweatpants with her laptop open and 3 empty coffee cups beside her. Renee looked around. You know, this is exactly how people end up on those documentaries where they haven't seen sunlight in 6 years. Kiara did not look up from the screen. I have deadlines. You have issues. Kiara laughed softly. Renee walked over, took the laptop out of her hands, and snapped it shut. Get up. I am not in the mood. I know. That's why we're leaving. An hour later, they were sitting on the patio of a Mexican restaurant drinking margaritas while Renee complained about her boss and a man she was dating who still used his ex-girlfriend's Netflix account. Kiara laughed so hard she nearly cried, and for the first time in months, the laugh did not feel fake. Little by little, she started letting herself have a life again. She went to church with her mother and grandmother on Sundays and stayed afterward to eat in the fellowship hall instead of rushing home. She spent more Saturdays at Miss Tanya's salon, listening to the same women tell the same stories. You know what your problem is? Miss Tanya said one afternoon while trimming her hair. Kiara smiled. I have a feeling you're about to tell me. You don't know how to sit down. The whole salon laughed. Miss Tanya pointed the comb at her. Every time something happens, you start trying to carry everybody. Kiara looked down, because she knew she was right. One weekend, Aunt Celeste dragged her to a family barbecue. Kiara almost said no. Then she remembered how many years she had spent saying no. So, she went. The backyard was crowded and loud and familiar. Kids ran through the grass with water balloons. Somebody had music playing too loud. Her uncle burned half the hot dogs and insisted they were still good. At one point, Kiara sat in a lawn chair with a paper plate in her lap, while her little cousin's daughter climbed into her lap without asking. Can you braid my doll's hair? The little girl asked. Kiara smiled. Probably. As she sat there untangling cheap doll hair with her fingers, she looked around the yard, at her family laughing, at her mother dancing badly in the grass because Aunt Celeste dared her to, at Miss Loretta sitting in the shade fanning herself and pretending not to enjoy any of it. And for the first time in a long time, Kiara realized something. She had spent so many years trying to save her marriage that she had forgotten there were other parts of her life worth saving too. A few weeks later, she did something that surprised everyone. She took a vacation, by herself. When she told Denise, her mother nearly dropped her fork. You? Alone? Kiara laughed. Why is everybody acting like I'm joining the circus? Because you haven't taken a real break since Obama was president. Renee immediately started making a list. You need somewhere with a beach and drinks and no men. I wasn't planning on finding men. Good, because your picker is broken. Kiara ended up renting a small house near the water outside Charleston. Nothing fancy, just a little place with a porch and a view of the marsh. The first day, she did not know what to do with herself. She woke up early out of habit, made coffee, opened her laptop, then stared at it. There was nobody to take care of, nobody to fix, nobody waiting for her to make everything okay. The silence felt uncomfortable at first. Then slowly, over the next few days, it started to feel peaceful. She walked by the water in the mornings, read books in the afternoons, sat on the porch at night, and listened to the insects and the wind. One evening, she caught herself smiling for no reason. That scared her a little. Then it made her smile more. When she came back to Houston, something in her had shifted. Not dramatically. She was still healing, still sad sometimes, still angry sometimes, but she no longer felt like she was disappearing. One Sunday afternoon, she went to Miss Loretta's house after church. Her grandmother was sitting on the porch in her usual chair with a glass of sweet tea and a crossword puzzle she never finished. Kiara sat beside her. For a while, neither of them said anything. Then Miss Loretta looked over. You look different. Kiara smiled. Better or worse? Better. Her grandmother took a sip of tea, less tired. Kiara looked out at the street. I think I am. Miss Loretta nodded slowly. Then after a minute, she asked, when was the last time you did something just for yourself? Hunter moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the other side of Houston 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized. The apartment was clean, quiet, and forgettable. White walls, cheap carpet, a parking lot view. The kind of place people live in when they are trying not to think too hard about how they got there. For the first month, he told himself it was temporary. He would figure things out, get his business back together, find another house, another life. But the truth followed him anyway. It followed him when he opened the refrigerator and saw nothing inside except takeout containers and a bottle of mustard. It followed him when he came home from work and there was nobody there to ask how his day went. It followed him every time he reached for his phone to call Kiara before remembering he no longer had that right. His business never completely collapsed, but it shrank. Without Kiara's support, without her contacts, without the quiet safety net she had spent years building under him, Hunter finally had to face what his life actually looked like. Smaller, harder, more fragile than he wanted to admit. He sold the watch he used to wear to business dinners, stopped going to the expensive restaurants where everybody knew his name, stopped trying so hard to look successful, because the truth was, he was tired of pretending. One rainy Tuesday, he was sitting in traffic when he caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. For a second, he barely recognized himself. He looked older, not because of the divorce, because for the first time in his life, there was nobody left to perform for. That night, he called a therapist. The first session was awkward. He sat in a beige office across from a woman named Dr. Levin and spent 20 minutes talking about work because it was easier than talking about himself. Finally, she looked at him and said, "You keep describing your life like something happened to you." Hunter frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you talk about your marriage, your career, your choices like you were standing outside of them." She leaned forward slightly. "But you were there." He looked down. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then, very quietly, Hunter said the thing he had never said before. "I think I hated my wife for being everything I wanted to be. The room went silent. Even he had never admitted it that clearly. Not strong, not successful, but certain. Kiara had always known who she was, even when she was scared, even when she was tired. She never needed other people to tell her she mattered. Hunter had spent his whole life needing that, from his father, from his mother, from strangers, from women. And when Kiara stopped being somebody who made him feel bigger, he had gone looking for somebody easier, somebody weaker, somebody fake, just like he had been. The realization did not make him feel better. It made him feel ashamed. Weeks passed. Then, months. The leaves changed. The weather cooled. Hunter stopped calling Kiara because he finally understood that every apology he made had secretly been another way of asking her to make him feel better. So he left her alone. One Saturday afternoon, he found an old box in the back of his closet. Inside were pieces of their life together. Pictures, movie tickets, the receipt from the taco place where they had their first real date, a photograph of Kiara sitting on the hood of his car laughing with her head thrown back. He sat on the floor of the apartment, holding the picture for a long time. Then he finally did something he should have done months earlier. He wrote her a letter, not a text, not an email, a letter, because for once, he wanted to say something without expecting an answer. He sat at his kitchen table for almost an hour before he wrote the first line. Kiara, I used to think the worst thing I did was cheat on you. Now I think the worst thing I did was spend years letting you carry me and then punishing you for being strong enough to do it. He stopped, read it again, then kept writing. I blamed you for the parts of myself I was too ashamed to face. You spent years loving me, protecting me, helping me, and instead of being grateful, I turned your strength into something to resent. I know now that you were never trying to make me feel small. I already felt small, and instead of learning how to live with that honestly, I spent years pretending I was somebody else. He wrote until the sun went down. When he finished, the letter was 4 pages long. There were no excuses in it, no promises, no maybe one day. Just the truth. At the very end, he wrote, You were right. I did not want a wife. I wanted an audience, and you deserved so much better than that. I hope you find a life that feels lighter without me in it. He folded the letter carefully, mailed it Monday morning, and did not expect to hear from her again. 3 days later, Kiara came home from work and found the envelope in her mailbox. She recognized Hunter's handwriting immediately. For a second, she thought about throwing it away. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table, opened it, and began to read. By the time Kiara finished the letter, it was dark outside. The kitchen was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of rain tapping softly against the windows. She folded the pages carefully and set them on the table. Then she sat there for a long time, not crying, not angry, just still. Because the strange thing about finally hearing the truth is that sometimes it does not change anything. Hunter had finally understood what he had done. He had finally said the things she spent years wishing he would say, but the truth had arrived too late to save them. And somehow, that was okay. Kiara stood up, walked to the sink, and poured herself a glass of water. When she looked out the kitchen window, she saw her own reflection in the dark glass. For years, she had looked at herself through other people, through her mother's sacrifices, through the women in her family who taught her that love meant giving until there was nothing left, through Hunter and all the ways he needed her to be smaller so he could feel bigger. But standing there in the quiet, she realized something. She did not owe anybody that version of herself anymore. The next evening, she drove to Miss Loretta's house. Her grandmother was already out on the porch in her chair with a glass of sweet tea balanced on one armrest and the radio playing low beside her. The sky was turning orange over the neighborhood. Kids rode bikes in the street. Somebody nearby was grilling. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and then stopped. Kiara sat down in the chair beside her grandmother. Miss Loretta looked over. You all right? Kiara smiled a little. I think so. Her grandmother nodded like that was enough. For a while, they sat without talking, the same way they always had. Finally, Kiara reached into her purse and pulled out Hunter's letter. Miss Loretta glanced at it. You gonna answer him? Kiara looked down at the envelope, then shook her head. No. Why not? Kiara thought about it, because she forgave him. In some ways, she already had. Not because what he did was acceptable, not because he deserved another chance, but because carrying all that anger felt too much like carrying him again. And she was tired of carrying people. "I don't think everything needs an ending," she said quietly. Miss Loretta smiled faintly. "That's the first wise thing you done said in 30 years. Kiara laughed. The porch grew darker around them. The air smelled like summer and cut grass and somebody frying onions in a nearby kitchen. Kiara leaned back in her chair and looked out at the street she had known her whole life. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who learned too early that love meant sacrifice, the woman who built a business from nothing and then hid her own success so the man she loved would not feel ashamed, the wife who spent years making herself smaller and called it loyalty. And she thought about the woman she was now, still healing, still learning, but no longer willing to disappear. For years, she thought the hardest thing in the world would be losing Hunter, but that had not been the hardest thing. The hardest thing had been losing herself while trying to keep him. And now, sitting on that porch with the sun disappearing and her grandmother beside her, she finally understood something she wished somebody had taught her years ago. Real love does not ask you to shrink. Real love does not need you to stay quiet so somebody else can feel important. Real love is not built on one person carrying everything while the other person takes and takes until there is nothing left. She closed her eyes for a second and let the evening settle around her. Then she opened them and smiled, because for the first time in a very long time, she felt like herself again. And maybe that was the real second chance. For years, I thought loving somebody meant carrying them. But the truth is, if you have to make yourself smaller for someone to feel bigger, that isn't love. That's loneliness with company. A year later, Kiara drove past the Westin by accident. She was on her way to meet Renee for lunch when she saw the hotel out of the corner of her eye at a red light. For a second, everything came back. The ballroom, the microphone, the red dress, the envelope in her purse. Then the light changed, and she kept driving, because that night was no longer the story of how she lost her marriage. It was the story of how she finally stopped abandoning herself to keep somebody else comfortable. And if you've ever loved someone so much that you started disappearing inside the relationship, if you've ever spent years trying to prove your worth to someone who only noticed you when you became smaller, I hope you remember this. You do not have to earn love by carrying everything alone. You do not have to stay where you are only valued for what you give. And sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is walk away from the version of themselves that settled for less. Welcome to the family. And if this story meant something to you, let me know in the comments what lesson stayed with you the most.
Thank you for watching Mr. Graham Stories, my beautiful, amazing family.